Well, here we are again, and we're in episode 18, and we're feeling the fear in doing it anyway, which I suppose is quite apt, considering we're coming up to the 31st of October. Because just to let you into a secret, we do actually record this before we let it out on the 5th of November, on the 5th of the month every month. So we'll have fireworks for this one, possibly, hopefully, if they get really excited about it. However, we have a new person. And so we're going to do the introductions and let our new person take the last spot in the honour spot so we can get to know a little bit more of what she's doing and who she is. So we'll start, of course, with the lovely Angela in the corner with her new green wall.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of a shake up. We've changed to the opposite end of the shed. And I don't quite know why I picked green, but there we go. So I'm Angela. I'm a health kinesiologist, a hypnotherapist, and a transformational coach. And I work with lots of different people to deal with transition points in their lives as well as other things. So whatever's going on for whoever's out there, come work with me and we'll see what we can do to make it better.
Mary.
I'm Mary and I'm from the wonderfully very wet Cork this evening. So hopefully you won't be hearing the rain over my microphone, but I actually am also a coach, but I work with people who get overwhelmed, who get into jobs that they can't quite get their head around, and I help them get in the flow and be successful with ease. That's me.
Brilliant. Willie.
Just to change the theme, I'm also a coach. I'm Willie Nichol. I'm the cop turned coach because I was a police officer for 31 years and went into corporate security, made redundant, and then I found coaching, or more accurately, coaching found me. I guess I'm a kind of mindset and transformational coach. I like to say, change your thinking, change your mindset, change your life. And I work with people who want to make changes in their life, whether it be getting rid of things, getting hold of things, making things better, or whatever. So contentment life coaching, the cop turn coach, helping you to make your life better.
We actually all do a little bit of therapy, honest. Monica.
Thank you. My name is Monica Ross and I live by the sea in Ireland, which inspires me an awful lot. I'm an embodied leadership coach and I'm also a coaching supervisor. And I work with people really helping them to realize that their body is a huge resource, that, you know, from the day you're born, you're in your body. And sometimes people are walking around as if they only have a head on sticks. And so it's really allowing people to connect back to themselves through centering, through calming their system, and to find the resources that they already have. And also to help them to have really authentic conversations with themselves and with others, and to advocate for what they want, for what will really help them to do what they need to do in life with others and with a great sense of courage. So working with passion and purpose. So that's me. I think that's all I'd like to say. And thank you.
Thank you. And well, I'm just a hypnotherapist and coach as well. Also an energy worker, occasionally. So we're all kind of a way of looking at what our clients bring to us. And more often than not, it's based in fear. At the root of anger, there's fear. At the root of fear, there's fear. Anxiety is fear. And it's all got to do with what's going on in your body as well as your mind, because one does have an effect on the other. So I'm wondering, how are we looking at fear these days, particularly because there are so many different kinds of fear? It's like on a spectrum, because you've got at one end of the spectrum, you've got like butterflies and stage fright kind of things. And then you've got on the other end, absolute terror. And we can range up and down that line quite happily, particularly if we go and see certain films or read certain books. Although for me, Stephen King is more still on the butterfly side than on the terror side. Just me, perhaps, I don't know. What is it about fear these days in 21st century that is so different to how it used to be? What do you think, Mary?
I think, actually, I think it's a really good question, because I think the whole COVID thing created a type of societal fear that we hadn't dealt with. And I think in the process, people began to connect to their own internal personal fears. And one of the pieces that I'm absolutely fascinated by currently is that this society, that I don't know if you had it in Scotland, but we had every single day in Ireland, the number of cases, the number in ICU, the number of deaths, and it was again and again, and it was completely feeding a sense of fear and terror and petrified. And in a sense, I think it unleashed. Saying you're afraid is now okay, whereas fear a lot of times was associated with being a negative, that fear was somehow bad. Now, I don't agree that fear is bad. Fear is just fear. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. But sometimes we attach a negative emotion to fear, whereas I think with the whole of COVID, this realization that we all have fears in different scenarios and different levels has become very conscious for an awful lot of people in a way that it wasn't there before. So I think that is really new.
So the awareness of the fear is now what's kicking in, you think?
Yeah. And
It's
the acceptability of talking about it.
It's the kind of equivalent in the 15th and 16th century of the guy with the cart going up the street shouting, "Bring out your dead," when the plague was going on, you know, and everybody could see these bodies being stacked up on carts. We don't see that anymore, and we haven't seen it for a long time. So this idea of what we're looking at with that box in the corner of the room, which actually all you have to do is turn it off, is something that has become this almost gaslighting, if you like. It's a word that's being bandied about quite nicely now as well. We're being kind of gaslit into the idea that we have to be so fearful of everything. And it's, for me, I think I'm seeing a kind of turning on its head on that basically that was all very well to get people to do what they wanted them to do, like stay indoors, not do anything. But now it's having the opposite effect in some ways, because it's made them so fearful that they won't come out even if they can. And then you get the other end of the stick, of course, when they go out whether they could or not. Because
are those the ones that switch the telly off?
Well, I switched the telly off. I don't go out. I didn't go running down to the nearest beach when the lockdown came away. You kidding me? Nah, not in Scotland.
That's a different story, though. That's just temperature related.
No, it's probably me related. What do you think, Monica?
It's interesting because I suppose if you think about it, as human beings, we've been hardwired for protection and for connection. And I think in the last year and a half, particularly, that kind of reptilian brain has been on high alert. And it's been, as Mary said, you know, we're being fed this kind of governmental sense that you must protect yourself, you must, and it's heightened it. And what I've noticed is that people that I've been working with, and I work a lot with coaches and I work a lot with leaders who are holding space for other people. And it's really about, I spend a lot of my time calming people down and helping them to kind of find a place of equilibrium in themselves so that they can calm the people around them. And when they can do that, and you can see Kermit behind me, part of it is accessing fun and inspiration and a sense of actually there's more around. You know, there's so much goodness became evident in people over the COVID period. So many positive qualities that are sometimes forgotten when so much fear comes up. So it's reconnecting to the parts of us that are also there. And particularly that connection part. You know, that when, if you think of all of the acts of kindness that were carried out, really inspirational work and real acts of heroism, that's also part of us. So I suppose it's bringing a balance. So yeah, that maybe I'm bringing in another side of the coin.
Yeah, and for fear of being sued by the Muppets, other toy frogs are available.
I think I increased the global sales of Kermits over the last year. Lots of my supervisees have gone out and bought some.
Okay, that's the product placement button being pressed for me when we
But I
put
think-
this live.
I think it is interesting. The one thing that the last 2 year and a half has brought us is that the tilting of the balance between fear and connection. And I think I've seen quite a number of people where their need for connection was what actually got them to overcome their fears. But where you have some individuals, say, who might be more introverted, they didn't have the same need for the connection. So they were reveling in this fear because they were able to function really well because they didn't have to engage with people. They were having an absolute ball in their own tiny, tiny little world. So I think there's been some interesting interplays. And I think that in some sectors now, with people going back into the workplace, there's a lot of questioning still going on, which I think is a good thing. And so people are saying, yeah, I am afraid, but I don't want to face it. I want to stay at home. It suits me better.
What do you reckon, Willie?
Well, where do I start? I think there are different types of fear, different levels of fear. As you say, they can range from the butterflies to the abject terror. In my previous role as a police officer, I was in some scary situations, but it was my role, my job, to get done whatever required to be done, including running towards whatever it was when everyone else was running away. But that was a product of my training and instinct and everything else. I think, as Mary has alluded to, that the last 18 months, the pandemic, the lockdowns, have exacerbated pre-existing fears. One major one, in my opinion, is uncertainty, the fear of uncertainty. Our mutual friend, Mr. Daye, gave us that interesting article that our brains are not equipped to deal with this level of uncertainty. Because, as Monica said, we're kind of hardwired to look for certainty, framework, structure, predictability. And that has come back from caveman times where we kind of grew up wanting that framework, the family, the tribe, whatever it was, and we became comfortable in that kind of environment. And when that's taken away from us, we're faced with the opposite, which is uncertainty, which has been pushed to unprecedented levels. And I don't like the word unprecedented, but anyway, by the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns, further exacerbated by the data, which I might cynically call propaganda, being fed to us by the media, the telly, the papers, etc., primarily from governmental sources, who of course are informed by the science. And it appalls me to find that the scientists come out and say, we're looking at the plausible worst case scenario. Therefore, they predict the absolute worst that could happen and give the figures out accordingly, which have been increasingly found to be totally and utterly inaccurate. A further thing that appalls me is they have departments within the government which have been euphemistically called nudge units. So they want to nudge the public towards a particular form of action, which is basically done through fear. If you don't do this, a bad thing will happen. If you do this, a bad thing will happen. Please protect the NHS, by all means. Don't do this, don't do that. Otherwise, bad things will happen, up to and including you'll kill your granny. Right? Now, to me, that is totally and utterly unacceptable. Treat us like adults, give us proper information and data, and allow us to make our own informed decisions and risk assessments. Whereas people have been browbeaten, scared, and coerced into certain forms of action. Now, I was a coercer of action when I arrested people, but that was for a very good reason. But I've gone full circle. I don't like to be told what to do. And very few people do. They do not like to be pushed. They do not like to be coerced. However, if they get to that point where they kind of give up, that's a very bad place to be. So fear has been instilled in us, has been beaten into us in order that we conform. Now, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I happen to think it's a bad thing. Yes, I'm not advocating carnage, chaos, unlicensed revelry, and so on and so forth. Of course not. Sensible precautions have to be taken, but not to the point of you cannot go out your house, you cannot hug your grandmother, you cannot see your kids, etc., etc. I don't think that is the function of the authorities to impose these draconian restrictions on us. And I kind of reverted to my student days and just being a bolshy bastard and saying, I'm not having it. Excuse my French. So fear in this instance, I think, has been used very, very badly. It's not a good state to be in. We all know what it's like with the palpitations and the heartbeat and, oh, should I go out the door and should I do this or should I go to the supermarket? Should I wear a mask or not wear a mask? And the rules, I still wear a mask because they don't let you into the supermarket now. And if they don't let you in, you don't get any food and you don't eat, which is not a good thing. But the fear, I'm sure there was a movie called The Fear.
There was.
And there's an acronym which I can't remember, FEAR, right? But
Fake evidence appearing real.
something like that, yes, that'll do, right? And that, in fact, thank you for that. That can encapsulate exactly all the BS I've been talking about. Right? If the powers that be, and we elect these muppets, with no disrespect to Kermit, right, to run the country, right, to give us guidance, to do what's best for us, right, and really, they couldn't run a bath, quite frankly. However, I digress. Sorry, that was a ramble there. I will shut up now.
But it's really interesting because I think, I can't really remember, but I think that the only fear we are born with is the fear of falling. And
I think that's correct.
And I think that the rest of the fears are actually instilled. And actually, Willie, I'm going to tell you something. When I was wee, a fear of the police was instilled into me quite happily and quite well, because I swore in front of my granny one day. And I was so wee, I was wearing a pair of dungarees that she could pick me up by the straps of. And she hiked me down to the police station where Mr. McKee, Sergeant McKee, was behind the desk. He's a very old-fashioned policeman, and basically he was the kind of policeman at the time who would take you round the back, give you a scud in the back of the neck and tell you, you know, don't do it again, instead of doing the paperwork. And then he'd take you back to your house, and your mother and father would give you a scud in the back of the leg as well. So things have changed. However, my granny took me down there and sat me up on top of the counter and said, George, she's been swearing. And they took me and they put me into one of the cells. Now, for a wee girl, one of these big old Victorian cells with the tiles that look like a bathroom, it's big, it's cold, and it's, you know, very echoey. And they left me in there while they went and had a cup of tea. So that instilled in me a very, very interesting respect for the police, in that your liberty can be taken away from you for the simplest of things, especially if your granny tells on you.
I think I'd have had the bigger fear of the granny.
I was just going to say that.
My granny was great. That was the interesting thing. She was kind of impressive, but it was my grandfather that everybody else was scared of, except me. And I've always wondered how that worked. But that's another story anyway.
Just thought of a marvellous title for a book. My Granny Grasped Me Up.
The grasping granny.
Coming to all booksellers near you soon.
And that was the one bestseller for sure. It used to annoy me, Leslie, to be serious, when it wouldn't be wait till your father gets home. I'll get the police to you, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of became the bogeyman, right? When you're trying to engage with kids. I remember a situation where I was playing Kirby, which is two boys at either side of the road trying to bounce the ball off the curb and bounce it back. And a big copper came up and took my ball away.
Yeah.
And I had to go down to the police office and retrieve it and be given her out. I was 10 or something. But it's a wee bit like the government, like, see, well, oh, the bogeyman will get you if you don't do X, Y, or Z. So there's fear coming into it again. So was it respect or fear of the police you felt after that?
You see, you've just brought up an interesting person, the bogeyman.
Okay.
I'm sure that most of us have actually been brought up with the idea of a bogeyman. And I'm assuming that it's a boggart in various places. J.K. Rowling did a lot of research, and I'm sure she did it right. So it's very important to get these things right when you're dealing with fairies and things like that, little demons. So we have this idea that there's a thing that we have to do, you know, be afraid of the bump in the night. And it's got a lot to do with the fact that if we can see the beastie, and I mentioned Stephen King earlier, he did a reference book called Danse Macabre, where he explains the fascination and the way that horror works. And one of the best things that he could describe it as, and I love it myself, is the monkey's paw, because they never show you what happens. They leave it to your imagination. You get all the build up and all the atmosphere, all that sort of sympathetic parody that goes on, but you never actually see what's behind the door when the door's being knocked, because the guy gets a hold of the monkey's paw and puts it in the fire. Spoiler alert, by the way. But you should see it. Actually, it was Lee Majors who played the son in it that got killed in the version that I watched when I was a little girl in the 60s.
No recollection of this one.
What film is it? You've mentioned names of directors and writers.
The Monkey's
Is
Paw.
the film actually called that? Right, okay.
It's called The Monkey's Paw, yeah.
Never heard of it.
Well, you don't like horror books, so, you know, that's probably why.
I'm not allowed to watch them.
But that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That a lot of people actually enjoy being frightened, so they will go and see a horror film or go and buy a horror book so they can revel in the idea of being frightened. However, when it becomes manipulative, like you're saying, Willie, it does become a little bit more dangerous.
But just coming back to this time of year, it's the one we actually teach people. We teach every child that getting scared is a good thing because you get nuts and treats afterwards.
Well, you see, that's interesting, because I get really upset with the whole Americanization of the trick or treat carry on, because that's got nothing to do with what it actually means in the first place.
True.
But which holiday still has its original meaning, right?
I'm sorry, was that WITCH?
No.
Since we're doing this on Halloween. So basically, yeah, there are very few that actually mean what they're supposed to mean. They've been appropriated many times over. However, this has been appropriated by commerciality, a bit like the way that the solstice has. And so it's a case of all these different cultures and countries that are amassed into the continent that is America have all got these old ideas of what it is, and we have our own here in Ireland and in Scotland. And
Samhain, yeah.
from where Samhain, yeah.
Yes.
And from what we're doing is that we're aware of the fact that it's a time for recognizing the ancestors. It's a time when we're looking at traditionally and ancestrally, looking at the cattle in the field and thinking, yeah, I'm never going to make it over the winter. There's no point in feeding you. So we're just going to slaughter you, have a party, eat you, and then put your bones on the fire, which is where the bonfire comes from, because it's bonfires. And that was done so that they could sow the feeds with a bone meal, sow the fields, so that they would be absolutely there the next year, ready for everything to be sown. but also the guising, the going out in disguise and chapping people's doors. That has to do with the spirits of people who have passed in the past year, particularly honouring them and allowing them to come back. This idea that we've got, you know, ghoulies and ghosties and you're going to get, you know, bad things happening to you. It's all about respect for the dead. It's about respect for life. So it's been taken in, and we used to have to go in, and that was the scary thing as well. You had to actually go do something for your nuts and your sweeties in those days.
Yes,
You had to
you had
actually
to do a party piece.
Yeah, you had to tell a joke, you had to sing a song, do a wee play thing. And it started as soon as they opened the door. You know, the sky is blue, the grass is green, may we have our Halloween? And then, of course, in Scotland, I'm sure Billy Connolly comes into the song where the sky is blue, the grass is black, get to it and don't come back. But this is again why we had the jack-o'-lanterns outside. If there was a jack-o'-lantern outside, the kids could say, oh, that person likes Halloween, we'll go and tap on that door. If the lights are out, they didn't go. There was none of this chucking toilet rolls or eggs or anything like that by anybody.
I could never understand where that came from. Because it was never part of what I ever did. I had no concept of it. And then I realized, oh, people do things. And I just thought it was horrible.
Well, you see, this is where the trick comes from, is the person at the door, if you refuse the person at the door to give them a treat, they play a trick on you. But the idea of a trick to me is something a little bit different than chucking an egg at somebody's car.
Yeah, that's the bit of it I couldn't handle.
So there are many different traditions that are based basically to allow us to understand what death is and not to be afraid of it, because it's a natural thing.
Part of the cycle.
Yeah, but we've actually managed to become separated from the idea that one day we're going to die. And I think, coming full circle back to where we are now, part of this whole situation is that the whole world, really, or the Western world, who are typically afraid of it completely. No, I don't want to get old. No, don't want to age. I've suddenly realized, hello, here's a mirror of your mortality. This is how it works.
But one of the things, and it's a completely opposite impact, that while there was a whole bunch of people staying indoors, getting very isolated, getting very fearful, one of the things I've noticed is the number of people who actually moved jobs or started businesses during COVID. And some people, it just like literally was, oh, this is happening, I have a new opportunity. Yeah, and they never saw the fear. They just didn't go there.
Or was it an away movement, not a to-move movement? Was it an away from, I've never liked this job, I only stayed in this job because I felt I had a duty to do this and I had to bring in money and I had to look after this person. But now I've got a short lifespan. I know it could end tomorrow. So I'm going to go and start that business I was all talking about, and I'm going to do that. So we're still being pushed by fear, in a way.
I think some maybe, but I think some actually, well, I would have a number of connections. I see that they're moving from one corporate job to another corporate job, getting promoted, that they're actually thriving despite everything else that's going on. They're kind of seem to have a goal and a mission or a view of life. They're just moving forward. They're oblivious to the rest of it.
They've seen the opportunities and they've gone for them, right?
Yeah, I was going to say it's an opportunistic mindset, really.
Yeah.
In that, at that level, it's a case of you see the next kind of prey that you're hunting and you go after it. As soon as you see that opportunity, it's like whoom, straight in there, because that's what's expected of you to a certain extent. If you stand still for too long, you get forgotten, you get bypassed.
And I suppose, if you think about it, fear in a kind of, when it's balanced, can be like anger. It can be a fuel for action, but it's how kind of over the top it goes. Because I think a lot of what's going on at the moment is that there have been traumas that have been building over centuries that are now coming to the fore, like, the whole thing around racism and there's huge fear of what can I say that's the right thing to say? What can I do? What can I not do? But where we can tap into fear and anger as a fuel to do something positive, like changing jobs or like making a courageous decision in one's life, then it's a useful thing. But a lot of people are stuck in a kind of a whole, it's almost like a quagmire of trauma that has been around for a long time and is now coming to the surface because of, as Willie was saying, the things that have been in society for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in our faces right now. You can know one thing, but you can't know another.
Yeah.
And if you know the other, you still can't know the other thing.
I think there's also as Monica kind of alluded to there, there's positive fear and negative fear. Fear is not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Fear keeps us on our toes, keeps us alert to danger or whatever. We go back to the old cavemen in the amygdala scenario, the fight, flight, or freeze. Right? That was hardwired into us because that kept us alive. The saber-toothed tiger didn't catch us. Right? So fear can be positive. Right? It can be positive, keeping us alive. It can be positive, as Monica says, pushing us onwards progressively, right? As opposed to the negative fear, which is we cower in a corner, shaking like a leaf, afraid to do whatever, go back to work, go to the supermarket. And I'm going back to the pandemic here. So there is a positive element to fear. And I have been afraid many times. I've had to do it anyway. So it's like, yeah, I'm afraid, but I've got to do it because it's my job, right? Or when I played rugby, I would look at the opponent who was 8'5" and 25 stone and think, oh my goodness, right? But I had to do it anyway because that's your role in the pitch. But the negative fear is what I was alluding to earlier, where we're being pushed, coerced into this negatively fearful state. And we all know what it's like, where it erodes our confidence, it erodes our self-esteem, it erodes our ability to connect with people, our empathy, you name it, right? That is the bad fear, if I can call it that, as opposed to the good fear. But it's the ability to recognize which is which. And I think most people have that, but increasingly that's become fuzzier or less apparent. So I mentioned the fear of uncertainty. Tony Robbins has a few quotes, which I think I shared with some people, that uncertainty can also be good, because rather kind of paradoxically, we like a certain degree of uncertainty, like unpredictability, excitement, anticipation. Oh, I wonder what that movie will be like. Oh, I'm looking forward to going there, or I'm looking forward to meeting someone that I haven't met before. Where you get the butterflies, not the terror, you get the butterflies because it's a good thing, it's exciting. And we need a bit of that in our lives as well. When I sign off for my weekly vlog with my friend, the IT geek, I always sign off, stay safe, stay well, and have some fun. Because I think that's been kind of knocked out of us also. And at a networking event it was this morning, that another presenter said exactly the same thing. And I thought, well, I don't know him, so he couldn't have stolen my line. But we kind of, I think some people have lost the ability to have fun, and medicine being the best laughter, etc., interaction with other people, having a laugh. You, as Billy Connolly would say, you can't whack it.
This is true.
And look at, I remember watching Billy Connolly shows, and afterwards you felt absolutely brilliant because your sides were sore, having watched Billy Connolly make you laugh.
You found muscles you didn't know you had.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Best workout. Really, really good workout to have proper belly laughter. It's a really good workout to burn tons of calories. One of the interesting things, I had a story. I think that a lot of the language we use around fear is that the language is placed in the negative, rather than this idea that there can be the fear to spur us on to action, or the encouragement. Because I remember I was taking my daughter many moons ago. She was about 8, to a new sport, and it was her first night. And I looked in the rear view mirror, and there was this tiny little face looking out at me. And I was just about to ask her, was she afraid? And I realized if I ask her, is she afraid, I'm actually making this a really bad thing. So I asked her, are you feeling butterflies? And are you looking forward to it? And I changed the questioning. So we decided she had first-time-itis.
Brilliant.
Because physically it was the same sensations. It was the excitement and the uncertainty and everything playing. But by changing the label, then that negative piece, because she'd heard of fear, she knew she had as a child, fear is bad. It's you're scared, fearful. So by changing the language, it changed the entire dynamic. So I think sometimes we use the word fear, and we're actually only looking at that piece of fear that's about the negative fear rather than that positive piece of it. So I think some of us as coaches need to be more careful in our language, because we actually need to pay attention as to, are we feeding? Like, I was afraid I'd fear my daughter's emotions in a bad way at the time. But by changing the language, I could make it more positive or more neutral rather than positive, probably a neutral situation. So I'm wondering, is that, when we say, feel the fear and do it anyway, well, actually, maybe, is it the right language?
But then fear is an emotion, right?
It's an
So
emotions are never good or bad.
Fear is an emotion, anger is an emotion, laughter and joy and fun and all that kind of stuff. They're all emotions. So we're the ones who are experiencing those emotions. We're the ones that put the filter onto it. So which filter are you using for which emotion? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And what can you do with it? And I think at the end of the day, it's up to us. We choose what we do with the emotions that we're experiencing.
But we can only do that by our experience of what happened when that particular situation came up before. I was just thinking there about the time when I was working, and the boss's 4-year-old granddaughter was trying to help me, and we were working in, sorry Angela, a cage full of cats, and but basically she was doing things. She was jumping around, she was climbing up on stuff, and I turned around and I looked, and I could feel my stomach going into a knot, and I could feel my heart jumping into my throat. Partly because, not really killing on kids at all, really. Scraping knees don't bother, but my boss would probably have killed me if anything had happened to her. And I thought, don't do that. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. You used to do that. You used to do that quite happily. What is it that's making you afraid for her? You're actually not afraid for her. You're afraid of the consequences. So basically, she's only going to find out if she does it herself. And of course, because she was fearless, nothing happened to her. Absolutely. They do say, don't they, that drunks and small children are always taken care of, because they just flop. They don't tense up before they do anything. It's when you get this tension going on, this in-tension situation where you're holding fear in your body somewhere, or your muscles start to clamp up, and it's basically because your adrenaline is hitting heights, and you're looking at it and you're getting ready to actually spring in like a parkour specialist, and jump like 50 million miles up into the sky to get away from whatever it is that you're feeling that you're going to do. But we do tend to map over those feelings, and I think I'm on about Nichol a lot at the moment because I'm so into this series of lectures that he's doing. And he does, he says, well, we're very overprotective. We put helmets on kids. We do this, we do that, they do the other. Nobody ever scratches their knees anymore or does that, and it's a major let's get them straight down to the emergency room if, they break a nail kind of thing. So is it a wonder that people are fearful because they're being taught to do that? But also there's a kind of dissociation of experience as well when we've got things like Instagram and TikTok and things like that, and people are actually putting stuff on as an influencer. So what they say and what they do and how they do it are what hundreds and thousands of other people are using as a template. And that can be, that kind of puts the fear into me a little bit.
I think Mary's spot on there with the use of language. Like studied NLP, language can be a very powerful thing for good and bad, can be very destructive. So you say things like, I'm afraid that won't work. I fear you're onto a loser there. You're not afraid. You're trying to maybe soften a blow or something like that. And I've read some papers that postulate, good word, that humans are hardwired towards negativity. So we ask ourselves questions like, what if? And it's generally followed by a negative. What if that doesn't work? What if I crash and burn? What if people laugh at me? What if a negative thing will happen? We tend to do that instead of saying, well, what if it does work? What if I'm successful? What if I become a millionaire? A good thing, whatever. If you believe becoming a millionaire is a good thing. And by the simple expedient of changing the way we talk to ourselves, changing the language, it can change our, as Angela said, our emotions from negative to positive, because emotions, feelings in motion, these are what drives our behaviour, and what drives our behaviour leads us to take certain actions. And if there's an action, there's a reaction or an outcome or a result. So if we can get away from the what if negatives to what if positives, and I've used this many, many times. What if all that negative bullshit you've just said isn't true? But what if it's not true? What if you made it all up? What if good things happen? What if it's positive? What if you make it a success? Because you haven't thought of that, have you? Now, I was like that. What if I arrest this person and it doesn't go well? Or what if they stab me? Or what if they shoot me? Or what if... Now, and 99 times out of 100, none of that happened. I've never been shot or stabbed, fortunately. But I've had a few punches in the face, right enough. But we are kind of hardwired to think, what's the worst case scenario? The glass half empty, the kind of pessimistic. Now, whether that's your makeup, whether that's your mindset, whether that's your map of the world that you have absorbed from your peers, your parents, or whatever, I think if your parents are miserable, you're probably going to turn out miserable yourself. But the negativity that we seem to kind of be cursed with, born with, not everyone, of course. And the good thing about it is it can be changed, it can be unlearned. We can learn to be positive. We can learn to be more or less negative, if you like. We can learn to, that what if negative rubbish, I'm not going with that anymore. I'm going to say, what if, yeah, it'll work. The can do kind of thing, which is a wee bit American, the can do spirit. But if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. That old quote from Henry Ford, was it?
Henry Ford.
Henry Ford.
Yeah.
It's a wee bit trite, but
He was Irish, I think.
Possibly.
Oh, well, there's definitely an Irish connection to Cork, and a Cork connection even better.
Does that mean he's right then? Yeah.
Of course.
And Willie, just picking up on what you were saying,
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
that, you know, there's something, again, it goes back to that protection. The negativity is a kind of a protective mechanism. And I suppose if we can notice ourselves, and this is where things like mindfulness come in, to slow down and see what language we're using, see how we're speaking to ourselves, see the tape we're running in our heads, and make a choice in the moment. And, you know, coming back to what you were saying, Angela, around, you know, emotions, it's really important that we know how we work with our own emotions and with other people's emotions. Because if we're holding the space for other people, it's really important that we're able to self-manage and notice if fear comes up in us, because that may not be useful to our clients. And so to be able to work with our own system to see what's coming up in us and to make a different choice in the moment. And this is where the body comes in, because when we can learn to calm our body, that calms the mind automatically. And the whole thing is emotion is energy in motion. So, I know, Leslie, you're an energy person like myself, and energy, it needs to kind of rise, crest and fall. And if we don't fight it, it moves away, it moves through the system and it clears itself. It's when we try to resist it or fight it that actually it gets stuck in us. So I suppose part of our role as coaches is to really be aware of our own relationships with fear, with anger, with other kinds of emotions, and with joy, to recognize that we can influence. Because the limbic system is constantly, we're reading each other's systems the whole time. And we can either infect somebody with what's going on in us, or we can pick it up from them. And again, it's to be choiceful around how we react. So yeah, the NLP has many useful tools, absolutely.
My wife's an energy healer, and I still don't know how to describe that, right? But it's a bit woo-woo. However, I'm aware of energy exchange. There's a nice energy in this room, despite the fact we're all miles apart. Yeah. Mm. I was on a call this morning, event, we were talking about people who have negative energy, and they were described as mood hoovers, which I thought was fantastic.
Brilliant.
Mood hoovers, well.
Mood hoovers, yeah.
I'm trying to say, do I like that more than energy vampires or not?
Well, that was my wife calls it an energy vampire. But you know what you mean? You can walk into a room and immediately feel, oh, someone sucked all the energy out of me. Or alternatively, walk into a room where there's a lot of energy and you feel energized because there's a good buzz about the place. But I thought mood hoovers. Right?
I like that. I like
it's just like, see you, you're nothing but a mood hoover, right? So beat it. I think I'll patent that.
Yeah, no, I like mood hoovers.
I was wondering if it was a case of we've been far too complacent for too long in the fact that there was not enough to be fearful of in a natural way, that now Mother Nature has come and said, perhaps, woomph, have this then, and dropped it in our laps. And suddenly because we haven't actually had the habitude of understanding that these things can happen, suddenly it's like being woken up from a deep, deep sleep, and your heart's racing and your throat's is closing and your eyes are popping out your head and you're running about because you don't know where you need to go or who you need to talk to. And I think it's important as well that people understand that there are coaches and therapists everywhere, all around, that are dealing with this all the time. And it actually can be a case of horses for courses, because just because you go to one and it doesn't work because you don't really get on with them doesn't mean that it's the therapy or the coaching that's at fault. Maybe it's the person doing it you're just not in rapport with.
And sometimes that fear feeling is a benefit, as we've talked about, but it's also that point of we don't have to stay there.
Yeah.
So acknowledge it, deal with it, move forwards. And Leslie, my love of sweeping generalizations. Not everyone has gone through the last 18 months feeling fear.
No.
And I think we need to recognize that not everyone's done that. People have got fear for lots of different reasons. And I don't want to poo-poo the fact that people genuinely are feeling fear right now with what is going on in the world and globally and the pandemic and everything else. But there are a number of people that are not going through this situation in fear. They've got fear of something else. And it's what you do with that fear. And if you're stuck in the fear and you can't get beyond it, then yes, absolutely reach out to somebody like one of us on the screen. But know that just like it's okay to not be okay, it's okay to feel fear. It's just what you do with it. It's maybe not okay to stay there.
Yeah, it's a healthy respect. It's like feeling peely-wally or meh.
That's one of my favourites.
Yeah, the menace of it all. And not menace as in, but the menace of it all. And basically, it's a case of it's okay to have a good wallow every now and again. it kind of sets your radar back up again. It recalibrates you, because you can't go about every day going, yes, it's great, it's wonderful, it's fun. Because
You can if you want.
You
well,
can, but it's
Pollyanna.
exhausting.
so
It's exhausting.
tiring.
You've
But
got
not. So that's my point. It's not exhausting for everybody. There are people out there who feel that when they're in that high energy, that's where they're thriving.
Mm.
But
And a
I
lot of people
think,
are in that high
like,
energy
I
because
mean,
they're stressed.
as Monica was saying earlier, everything is energy. So when you have that high, you do need to come. I think most people need to come down, and they might end up going back up, but they might only spend a little time down. But I think there is always a flow to energy levels. I don't think anybody stays at that permanent high 100% of the time.
I think I stay pretty permanently in the middle. I don't think I do the ups and
Well,
downs.
I don't
so
know.
much.
You had a little meh moment recently.
You
And
did?
that was my energy. I think that was just
Yeah, so you dipped slightly.
yeah, but it
But
wasn't
no point in
the
it.
fear. It wasn't.
You're
the
not
peak.
looking at the Cresta run. You're not going
No,
like this.
No,
We don't
but
need
I
that.
painted a
We need
wall and
that
I'm all good
kind of-
again, right?
Well, you space cleared.
Well, that was
space
it.
cleared, and you know, as we know, doing things physically is a
Yeah.
catharsis.
Yeah.
Well, it was the shift of the energy is what I needed, and that's what I did because I recognized it for me, and I did something about it. So, but that's the point. It's about recognizing
And a lot
what
of
is
people
going
don't
on
know
for
how.
you.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, and I think if you're finding yourself,
Sorry,
you're finding
Mary.
yourself in fear, and you are struggling with it, there is plenty of help and support out there, but you have to make a decision to go and do something about it.
Correct.
You know, the best thing to do is go and do something about it with someone who's going to help you to get over it, not someone who's going to say, come and sit with me, I'm miserable too.
Well, that is true.
I'm scared of everything.
We could set up a Mood Hoovers Association
Yes.
and wallow in our own self-pity and misery. However, one point I would like to make that Leslie touched on is I think things have become so risk averse recently. I'm not saying recently, within the last, say, 30 years, where we have health and safety assessments and we have risk managers and we have all that, where any form of risk is treated as a threat, which we should be afraid of. And it's kind of knocked a lot of the common sense out of us. Right? Don't touch that burning fire thing there because it'll be sore. No, let's do a risk assessment and write up a big paper and publish it when everybody knows putting your finger into the fire is not a good thing to do. So this kind of overly protective environment has been created where, I can't remember who said it, right? Kids have got to wear helmets and you can't play conkers anymore because you put your eye out, and you shouldn't ride your bike without stabiliser, and don't climb that tree, you might fall off. So all that overly protective thing has had a negative effect on what we used to call resilience, where we knew things, and if bad things happen, we bounce back up again because we were resilient. So resilience is kind of taking a back seat because of the overprotectiveness. In fact, I've just delivered a workshop to a young apprentices group about resilience and assertiveness because they're struggling a wee bit because they've been cosseted, they've been mollycoddled, right? And I think that, I don't know, the Gen X, Gen Z, the younger generations haven't become accustomed to making risk assessments. Okay, they probably look each way when they cross the road, but it's just, I better ask someone. Make your own decision about this. It's up to you. Or I'm afraid to make that because someone needs to tell me what to do. No, they don't. But I think particularly younger people now, and I'm an old fogey, have been conditioned to being told what to do, obey the rules, and that's too risky, that is, right? Oh, don't do that. Oh dear, dear, dear. And yeah, of course there are things that are risky, right? And they're quite rightly, there are rules and regulations to protect against these risks. But I think the conditioning is such that making those risk assessments, making those decisions about risk is a skill that has diminished from the individual. And that has gone all the way up the corporate ladder and the organisational ladder. So that the people at the top, oh, can't do that. Reputational risk. It's not even just about, if Johnny in the workshop cuts his hand off, right? And then think about, well, the optics of that won't look good, will they? That won't do our reputation any good. So risk assessments, and I did them in my corporate job. One of the things I had to do was make a business continuity plan. And they said, think of the worst possible case scenario. And I said, plague of locusts. How does this? Oh, for goodness sake, Willie. Now, I was being facetious to try and illustrate a point. Right, okay, if the power fails, or the computers fail, or we have this major leak, whatever it is, fine. But we become so used to, this is risky, here's the rules, here's the regulations, here's the assessment, and you don't have to think for yourself because we've done it for you. And then when the you know what hits the fan, and they're not about to tell you what to do, we sit there and go, blah, 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 because we don't know anymore.
I think a lot of it's got to do with the fact also that there's a fear of being sued.
Oh, absolutely, categorically.
You know, getting and having the whole carpet taken out from underneath you, particularly if you're a middle-sized business and you've got a whole load of stuff going on. But I've said it before, and I absolutely right down the line, I'm with it. We had a global common sensectomy in the 1970s, towards the mid to the late 1970s. Common sense just died, and they cut it out completely. I mean, I can say that as far as risk assessment is concerned. Let's see, I was kicked down a moat by an elephant. I've been trampled on by a couple of horses. I've been knocked down by 2 cars running at the side of a bus, and nearly fell off the side of a mountain last couple of years ago. So, yeah.
So from somebody that was born in the late 70s, no, I haven't done any of that. I think I've got a decent amount of common sense. So maybe you guys all had it cut out of you.
Oh, babe, I don't know about whether it's a case of common sense or whether you just didn't know the fun of it.
I'm not sure the
Hang
fun
on
of
a minute though. Didn't you go
yeah.
doing things like throwing yourself in mud and crawling around mud things and racing and that kind of thing?
But that had all been risk assessed before I did it.
I see, there you go.
I've jumped out of planes as well. I didn't get kicked in the head by an elephant.
I
Or the
didn't get
back,
kicked in
or
the
whatever you-
head by
or
an
whatever
elephant.
you-
I was just kicked in a moat.
I've not done that one yet, perhaps. I'm not convinced by that one, to be honest.
The absence of common sense, right? When I start ranting and raving about the what's going on in the world, and particularly politicians, I say, okay, can you do better? I said, yeah, we'll do. I'm going to start a party called the Common Sense Party. The sole criteria for action will be, does this make common sense? Yes or no? That's it, right? I remember as a young police officer being told, use your common sense, son, which I did use. And then they brought in, guess what? Risk assessments and rules and regulations. And common sense went way, way down the priority order. Does it tick a box? Is it within that parameter, that framework? So as you alluded to earlier, Leslie, instead of me clipping a young lad around the ear and dragging him up to his mum and dad, when he get a further clip around the ear and learn a lesson, it was, no, you're being arrested now and you will get a criminal conviction. And that means you won't get a job later, and so on and so forth. But then was the rules, and that's what you had to do. So common sense was replaced by processes, protocols. And a lot of that, as you alluded to, was so that we don't get sued for wrongful arrest or whatever. And that created a fear amongst the senior officers. How is this going to look? Right, just do it this way so we won't get sued. But that's not the most common sense we do at all. So that common sense thing. And yes, we've all still got common sense, I hope. Although I know some people who are deficient, and unfortunately I couldn't go into Sainsbury's and buy them a jar of common sense and say, here, eat a bit of that, would you? But all of this called together is, I think, the common sense.
You'll find next to the elbow grease.
Right, and the glass sky hooks, yeah.
And the tartan
paint.
So all of this under one is right. I think we've been common sense is kind of get down the priority order, and it's all about being risk averse and being told what to do.
And Willie, I suppose, going back to what we were saying earlier, common sense is something that you develop in small increments from the time you're born by taking small risks and being protected by parents who are kind of there, but they allow you just to take a little risk, and then you take the next one and the next one, and you're safe because you can run back into their arms if you're lucky, if you have parents who are there for you or guardians. But I suppose between protecting people from germs, children don't play in the mud anymore. They don't play with worms,
Which is basically why we have no immunity.
Exactly, because we've gone the other way. We've overprotected ourselves and over sanitized and we've gone to the other extreme.
I used to love the wee adverts, the wee public information adverts that you would get. And one of them was a wee guy, and he would do things like chuck his arm into a crate full of crocodiles and things like that and get his arm, cut off. And it's sort of talking about gravity, an apple falls down from the sky, type of thing, and a brick, a bar, a bolt, a cup falls down, invariably falls down, not up. And it just really caught my idea of thing. But also, I used to watch cartoons where Tom and Jerry were battering the living daylights at each other, and
they always came back perfectly.
Yeah, it's sort of like bent.
And that poor wily coyote.
You took the words out of my mouth, Angela.
That was that. Well, you see, there you go. You do get some very cruel birds.
And the Acme explosions.
Yeah, I thought it was great to find out that that's a company that makes everything. Took me years to find that out. But anyway, it's a case of there's fear, and there are levels of fear. And there's the fear of being and the fear of not being, the fear of knowing and the fear of not knowing. So unfortunately, what we have to do is pick and choose and decide whether or not we're going to let it rule our lives or allow it to be what it is, look at it and say, what's the best outcome for me here? What is it that I can do to alleviate this? What is it that really is going on? Is that person shouting at me because they're afraid? Is that person shouting at me because they're angry at me because I'm afraid and I'm not doing what I could be doing? So perhaps it's one of those things that, and especially at this time of the year, we should just let be what it is, as long as what it is balanced. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to say good night now. Make sure you get your night light on. And like they used to say in the old days, when you've turned the television off, take the plug out the wall, just in case.